G'day. Welcome to Fantasy. Well, Future Fantasy Empire, sorry. Brain freeze for a moment. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to be doing interviews. And the first shall be me. This way, you know what to expect. And to help answer questions you may have about the process, my links are in the description below. You contact me through Linktree. There's social media links as well as my Gmail. And you're probably going to wonder, well, what do I want in return for these interviews? Well, I would like you to subscribe, share the video that you're going to be in, of course. But of course, you're free to share all my videos. But please subscribe, like, all that stuff. But you have to contact me and I'll give you the questions. But of course, when you contact me, you have to tell me what you do, a little bit about yourself, and we'll schedule an interview. I'll give you the questions, you prepare your answers, we organize a date, and I'll give you an invite to StreamYard and I interview you. I'll ask you to keep it clean, keep it brief, try to keep it 10 to 15 minutes, try to stay on point. But we'll have a live audience, and payment's voluntary. I'm not asking you to, and I'm asking the audience too, if you'd like to subscribe and help the channel grow. Get to meet your authors. Encourage people the more the merrier. Get to meet your authors, hopefully, get to know a bit about the writing process, about YouTube, the creation process, inspirations, research, what people are about. That way, everybody helps everybody. So, if you'd like to help the channel, of course, I have Patreons in the link links in the description below. I have my books, and of course interviewees. Each interviewee will have their links as well above mine, because and every title will have the name of who's been interviewed, and of course I try to keep variety, but of course sometimes maybe somebody will have more than one book out, maybe not, or they come back later. I'm not going to exclude people who've been on before. I just hope to get lots of variety. And we actually have a few people already interested. So that's good. So just kick off. First question is, this is aimed at writers, but you introduce yourself to the audience. And pretty much my name is David Applegate. I'm the author of the books, The WriterSlife, which is book 1 of the Empire of Elves, Power Gains, the second book, and the third book, Into the Elves Mound. Well, second question, when did you realize you wanted to be a writer? Now, I've always liked fantasy. I find superpowers and magic fascinating. So in high school, I started writing adventures for Dungeons and Dragons. I've always liked science fiction more, however, so I got into Shadowrun, and I started to mash Shadowrun with Star Wars and Star Trek and fantasy. And then in 2016, I started writing. I've always liked science fiction, cyberpunk, and fantasy, so I merged them into my universe, Future Fantasy, which resulted in the first book, The Boyhood of Kay. Now, third question, tell me about your books. And of course, I've probably done this. I've done this before, but for the sake of interviews, let you know how the process goes, and actually, so you could actually know about my books. Well, we have The Boyhood of Kay, surrounds the events that shape Cade's future. Now, after the fall of Teen and Og, the elves left Earth, and they established a temporary home on Mars, while they explored the stars. They discovered new worlds and built themselves a large fleet and began a long exodus to the Pleiades. Centuries later, Cade Hashimoto was born. He is the flower of and the grandson of the emperor. Now, he's not an ordinary child. Most people could see this, but I did a lot of show don't tell in the first book, but there is genetic engineering and other factors involved. So the empire has mostly seen peace until now. Times are changing. Spacefaring pirates are bold as the empire struggles to meet its fuel demands. It has a massive fleet to maintain. It has starships spread over a long, exodus between Earth and the Pleiades, and the last fleet is coming home. And there are all these events that shape Cade's future as he grows up and discovers his purpose in life. I mean, something that I think a lot of people could relate to. But the second book is ProWritingAid, and that's about his rise to power. He's growing up fast, and the Emperor, Takahiro, is grooming Cade to be his successor. Now, facing many challenges in life, but he has little control, so he goes with the flow. He learns to take advantage of the situation he's in. He makes new friends, sets goals, and builds his own popularity. Now he's privy to secrets, so he takes advantage of this information to build his own power, wealth, and influence. And he builds a successful business empire. However, the pirates have not given up, and events lead to a deadly confrontation that will change Cade's life forever. Now, the Into the Earl's Bounds direct follow-on from Book 2. It covers the period where Cade is during his 18th birthday. He's made new friends. He's trying to enjoy life, but a dark cloud hangs over him. And along comes Gleam, a rogue knight. She breaks into his room and tells him of a threat to his life. To further complicate matters, the Dokuvar, Dark Elves, have come out of hiding. Now, the Empire's actually known about the Dark Elves, knew exactly where they are. That's why they've taken such a long, windy route to get to the Pleiades, to avoid them. Pretend they don't exist. But the Dokuvar are sick and tired of pretending they don't exist, and they're in deep trouble, so they come cap in hand to the Empire. But under pressure to maintain peace and his own personal sympathies, he takes them in. He takes in these refugees of war and disaster, mostly of their own making and self-inflicted wounds, but he still takes them in, and he's trying to please everybody, enact his own plans. Some of his friendships are growing stronger, others are growing weaker, and he's struggling to please his own internal demons. He's possessed. Pretty much spoiler alert, but I mean, unfortunately, it's at this stage, I think I think you do need to know how and why Cade's special. So, little spoiler, not really spoils too much. I mean, most people figure it out in the first book if they don't come across it in the second. But he has desires, but will these cost him his life? And of course, question 4. Now, how do I prepare for a new book? Whoops, I've got to mute the streaming in the background. Sorry about that. I don't know why. Usually I'm quite good at this. But anyway, sorry, I wrote the questions down and I actually filled them in because it's a lot. Too much to remember. And I don't want to do this on the fly. I want the people to know that the questions I've given them is the questions I'm going to ask them, of course. So I have to write them down. And I hope, the people have their answers prepared. So what did I do to prepare for a new book? Well, actually, I read my book. I read similar books in my genre. I prepared my mind I go through my fantasy world. I go through my notes on my fantasy world. I've built a world. I outline the events that are the next century, whether it's year, decade, century, and I build a story. Now, it's not an easy process. I'm not, mocking anybody who can't write. There are many approaches to storytelling, actually, and there are pretty much only certain paths you can take in each genre. You stray too far out of your genre. I mean, science fantasy already strays out of the genre. However, if you look at it technically, Star Wars is science fantasy. So Jedi are nothing but wizards. The clones, they're orcs. If you don't see the Kawasaki and Tolkien influence in Star Wars, well, I'm sorry, but them's the breaks. But speaking of Tolkien, the next question is, what are my inspirations? Well, Tolkien, obviously, to start with. I read Tolkien at an early age. I started with The Hobbit. I read that a few times, and I read Lord of the Rings, and that was something I spent a long time reading. I read a chapter about. I was slow reading back then, and I read a chapter about a week. I also had schoolwork, and also had regular D&D games. So, and of course, actually, I grew up a fan of. I went to Star Wars when 1977, when the original Star Trek movie came out. I went to see that. I saw the 1983. Was it 19? Oh well, I saw Starship Troopers, Dune, and then I discovered Shadowrun, and things started to click. And my favorite, that leads me to the next question: is who's your favorite author? And that would be Tolkien. Although I do like Robert Heinemann, and I do like I do actually like a lot of military sci-fi. I don't have a particularly favorite author with them either. But that leads me to question 7. What research do I do? Well, I've read various legends of various books on elves, orcs, dwarves, the history of dragons, and actually interesting stuff. I found it very interesting, actually, considering that dragons are very universal. The concept of goblins is very universal. You find elves are very universal. There are African, there are Asian, there are Mayan, there are Native American, there's Asian elves. And the flower elves, they're Asian elves. They're predominantly Japanese, Korean. They're prominently found. Those legends tend to be coastal, whereas in Nordic, they tend to be more isolated areas, Germanic. It seems to be very, very different. But in the Nordic legends, they talk about the Aesir, the people from the east. And that points to the elves. But there's the light-skinned elves, the dark-skinned elves, and the dark-hearted elves. And the dark-hearted elves aren't dark-skinned. They're dark-hearted. They're actually white. They're pale. They live underground. They're pale. Elves are particularly pale because most come out at night, but there are particular dark elves. They don't come out in the daytime, but they're dark-skinned. Why? I don't know why but they're missing in legends bits and pieces. So I think they were driven underground. whereas the dark-hearted elves were driven out of civilization. Quite a difference. But I also read different science fiction. I read a lot of military science fiction. I've played a lot of science fiction games over the years. Actually, one of my favorite genres in gaming is actually real-time strategies like Command & Conquer. I played that game to death. To death. But that leads me to the next question. What advice would I give to a new writer? Write. Every day. Even if it's a few lines. Try to write something. Now, a lot of writers actually experience this. And so you're not going to be the first. You're going to be halfway through a book and you're going to have new ideas. Ideas that won't fit in that book. If you don't write them down, they're going to haunt you. And then eventually you're going to say, oh, what did I forget? What did I forget? So writing is got to be a habit. I know making notes on your phone is cumbersome. I try not to make notes on my phone. I try to hold ideas. I try to write them down. Actually, I often find, and this leads to the question how I deal with stress. So I play video games, and when you relax, the ideas come, they flow, they're a bit better, and you help organize them. And sometimes a lot of books, if only they took another year. Actually, you find this sometimes with movies too. You just sit down and wish if they only took another year. I forget who actually gave the advice. They said the best advice of writing is if you took another year, and that was actually, I forget who said it, but perhaps I should have done this with the first two books. But anyway, so be it. I'm still pretty proud of my work. And I don't think I've done anything wrong, even though some people don't seem to click or connect or with, well, they tell me I do a good job, but yeah, telling me I've done good and becoming a bestseller isn't one and the same thing. And it's not an easy path when you're a writer. I mean, remember, there's way more competition there was in the 80s. The 90s saw an explosion of books. In the early 2000s, new genres dominated, and still some today, some still dominate. Science fantasy actually dominates fantasy genre. It's just that there's more books, fantasy, pure fantasy books, this kingdom, that kingdom, the romance kingdom, they're all different genres, all merging into fantasy, but they've always been there. It's just the volume. So there's no, well, occasionally somebody does make it big, sometimes only with one book. Some people say, I heard recently about what's it called? Elysium, something Elysium, and they made a game called something Elysium, and it's actually from a book. And video game makers, they rely on writers, especially RPGs. You need a story, and that's actually something I've looked at, whether or not I should do. Get one of those RPG makers and do a story, a simple story, and sell that story, because a good RPG will make more money than a book. But of course, you have to have a good RPG, and there's a million RPGs out there. For every RPG that's successful, I think there's 1,000 failures. It's like writing. We're not all going to succeed, but to succeed at writing, you only have to write the book. Right? That's going to be the same with YouTube. Success is been on the platform after a year. So what do I do when I'm not writing? That's the last question. Well, obviously, as I said, I deal with stress by playing video games. And I make videos and play video games. I write RPG stuff. This is how I build my world. I have a small, modest Patreon following on Future Fantasy over on Patreon, where I have a writing adult stories. My stories are for adults, not for children. That's by choice. I think far too many people write books for universal ages, yet, look at Game of Thrones. Definitely not for kids, definitely way more successful. I think Star Wars would have been more successful if they were more adult. They don't have, just because there doesn't have to be naked people running around to be more adult. They just have to be more adult. I think there's too many infantile stories out there, very simplistic stories. And the pulp, they get lost in the pulp trash because there's 1,000 others like them. But they're your stories. I'm not trashing you for writing them, but I'm saying don't expect or don't demand success, I think. That goes back to advice for writers too, I'm sorry. I'm starting to ad-lib, I know, but I encourage it. I want people to ad-lib. I want people to express themselves, and, people will charge you hundreds of authors out there. They're getting charged hundreds of dollars, and I'm offering you interviews. I know people. I'm going to get flooded with requests, and I can't do everybody. If I start get too many requests, I can't do more than a couple a day. Even though they take better time, then they're going to be live, not pre-recorded, so they're edited. But if you've got a book or a YouTube channel or a comic or something to promote, I've got a channel coming up soon, an interview coming soon. So after that, I'll be going through my emails again, accepting more. If you don't get an immediate response, please don't be disheartened. I've probably got a dozen emails by now, a couple of people waiting in the wings, some people not ready yet to do their interviews. They've got their emails, but I'll be putting out a few each week, hopefully. And hopefully you'll subscribe, you'll get your friends to subscribe, you'll stay subscribed, promote your video, promote people to follow my video. So, yeah. So, thank you all for listening. Please like, share, subscribe, and, all the fun stuff. Comment below anything you want to hear from, see about, anything. If you want some writing tips, I collect writing tips, So, all writers should. So, don't forget to hit that notification bell to never miss a video. My social media links, best way to communicate, best way to share the videos, follow me on social media. And of course, if you want to support the channel, my book links are in the description below. You can buy me a coffee. I've got the links in that. But I got a link tree because you start filling up all these links in your Facebook description. Nobody's going to press show more half the time. So thank you all for listening. I shall see you all on the other side.